When I was growing up, VCRs were still pretty expensive, and we would rent one from the video store along with the VHS tapes whenever we wanted to watch movies at home.
Wild Orchid. Hot stuff.
Only mature audiences, please.
It's funny how we thought we had it so much better than our parents, who had to wait all year for Wizard of Oz to come on Channel 4 again.
We now return to the Wizard of Oz.
Or our grandparents, who weren't watching Jack if they didn't feel like making an afternoon out of a trip to the moving picture house. Or I guess they could listen to the radio and use their imagination. That sounds like fun. The inconvenience made the experience more significant. I remember attending a viewing party for the Masters of the Universe film. Here's another way the inconvenience affected the viewing experience. You had to rely on oral tradition.
I remember you. Egon, move!
Like, for instance, you couldn't just binge every episode of The Real Ghostbusters. So, if there was some backstory to a recurring villain like the Boogeyman, and you missed the establishing episodes, you had to rely on folklore from siblings and school friends to fill you in.
Then, this one dinosaur, he spits his poison crap on this fat guy's face. And then, he attacks the dude in his own car.
The dinosaur had a car? How else you think he got there, dumbass? On a bike?
These stories would be grander in your head than they were on screen. And that would enrich what you're watching right now. As a kid, I don't remember watching Star Wars, but I knew the entire saga by heart. The farm boy who became an outer space knight in shining armor and fought the evil robot that killed his dad or whatever.
And he speaks words that burn into our hero's heart forever. I am your father.
When I finally got around to watching the movies in middle school, I liked them, but I liked the version in my head better. You could probably apply that same principle to people's disappointment with the prequel trilogy. The friendship between Obi-Wan and Anakin takes on a mythological proportion when it's only mentioned by Kenobi. When you see it play out...
Might I recommend?
You have no idea what that means, do you?
Sure I do.
You're just having fun with your hands, aren't you?
No.
Here's something to consider. When you show, don't tell, you can't cover anything that doesn't fit inside of a 16:9 frame and a 120-minute runtime. When you tell rather than show, the limitations of your medium disappear. There are things that can only be diminished in their depiction.
From the kingdom of heaven, please welcome God.
Paul Schrader, the dude who wrote Taxi Driver, considers film to be rooted more in oral tradition than in the forms that you might consider to be precursors to the medium.
I do not believe that screenwriting is part of the literary tradition. I believe it's part of the oral tradition. It's just me telling you a story.
As part of his writing process, Paul Schrader will take a friend out to lunch and tell them the story he's come up with. Gauging their response will inform him as to which parts of the outline could be shortened or expanded upon, which characters the audience will respond to, and whether or not it could use a little something to spice it up. Before he's even put a piece of paper in the typewriter, or whatever it is he does, Schrader has been working on his screenplay like a comedian trying material out on the road.
Be patient if y'all don't mind. Because I am funny. I did these jokes last night and they work.
You know that Paul Schrader is aware of Overwatch porn? He made a Facebook post a while back contemplating the implications of homegrown source filmmaker stuff on the porno industry. His Facebook page is wild. He's got fans there that don't even know he's a filmmaker. So here's what I'm getting at. I grew up watching the Ewoks cartoon show, and I didn't even know that it was connected to Star Wars. I categorized these little fuckers with like Popples and Care Bears and shit like that. So when I finally got around to watching the whole trilogy at 12 or 13 years old or whatever I was, it was kind of funny seeing the Ewoks show up in Return of the Jedi and feeling like I was watching a surreal crossover episode. In my mind, Wicket might as well have been Rainbow Bright for all the connection he had to Star Wars. With the Ewoks cartoon series effectively serving as my entry point into the Star Wars universe, it feels like what it really is at its best, The Hobbit with spaceships. So today I'm looking at Ewoks episode 13, Asha, which many fans consider to be the best of the series. Unsurprisingly, it was written by Paul Dini, who had a hand in dang near every animated show produced in the 80s. I've always admired what he was able to achieve on shows like Masters of the Universe, where they used the same stock animation loops week after week, occasionally tracing over them with a new costume or something when they had a new action figure to sell. That's another advantage they had pre-streaming. They could get away with stock animation abuse because nobody was binging He-Man and making a note of how we used that same punch animation last week. Of course, the reliance on stock animation presented additional challenges for the writers, who couldn't really have the characters doing anything that we hadn't already seen them doing. Some people say that The Simpsons ushered in the era of dialogue-driven animation, but it seems obvious to me that the high episode counts demanded by syndication were what really did it. Anyway, I'm sure Paul Dini's written a few lousy episodes of something somewhere in his prolific career, but I haven't seen them. From his early work on children's shows to developing Batman the Animated Series to writing the only good episodes of Creepshow, I've never seen Dini to be anything but the smartest and most mature writer in the room. And Asha showcases his talents about as well as anything he's written. Asha opens with the Ewoks chilling in the forest before getting drawn into this confrontation between the Dulaks,
Koopas,
and the Red Ghost, a fabled guardian of the forest who's getting after the Grinches for sport hunting, trying to kill this Star Wars deer. I'm not going to bother figuring out what all these things are called, alright? Let me show you an example of how smart Paul Dini is, and more importantly, how smart he expects the children watching the show to be. It's pretty obvious that the Red Ghost is Kneesaa's lost sister Asha, and Kneesaa immediately figures this out. It's not dragged out for a mid-episode twist, it's simply used to set the story in motion. They don't treat you like you're too stupid to figure it out. Paul Dini was ahead of his time in a very literal sense. You can probably credit Batman the Animated Series for getting the medium to where it could keep up with him. In the 80s, his nuanced, emotionally complex scripts were paired with Scooby-Doo sound effects and bottom-shelf slapstick. Even so, as G-rated as the action may be, Dini suggests a sort of aura of violence around the central conflict. The Dulaks are cruel and abusive, and there's no doubt that Asha is willing and able to kill them if that's what it takes.
Now go, and if you ever do this again...
I like that the tone of the first season meshes with the original trilogy. This isn't like a Marvel's Spidey and His Amazing Friends type of scenario where it's like a sanitized preschool version with all the sharp corners sanded down. For better or worse, Paul Dini is probably the chief innovator of children's shows that adults can enjoy. And there might not be any such thing as adventure show or regular time without him. All of this is not to say that the writing is the only good thing about this show's production. Some of the images are downright haunting, and the score is solid, and the theme song was written and performed by blues legend Taj Mahal. With
we are friendly spirits from the farthest moon.
I love the painted backdrops of Northern California, Endor. I spent a lot of time in that area growing up, and it makes me nostalgic for reasons that don't have much to do with Star Wars. I think most of the people guiding this show saw it as an opportunity to do something more sophisticated and meaningful than you just expect from a Saturday morning tie-in. I don't know what the ratings looked like for this show, but a second run of action figures was canceled due to poor sales of the first. The second season premiered with a sickeningly stupid theme song and a dumbed-down art style.
We walk all together and we're having fun. Friends together, friends forever.
Paul Dini was still writing for the show, but it was clear that they wanted to move in a softer, simpler direction, and it doesn't seem to have made a difference as the show was canceled after another 13 episodes. Listen, I got a theory, alright? It's not the tone of the show that turned kids off, it's the absence of an obvious audience insert character. That's why Redwall never did Harry Potter numbers. It's what the original trilogy had in Luke Skywalker. I find it silly when people dismissively refer to 80s cartoons as half-hour toy commercials, as if anything has changed since then. I pitched a show to Fred Orator a few years ago, and you know what they told me? They said, we can't see kids wanting to cosplay as any of these characters. If that's how the cartoon industry works, then I guess that's how the cartoon industry works. It's a lot easier to imagine yourself as a human protagonist than as a warrior mouse or a weird little furball. Someone in the YouTube comments here did say they had a crush on Asha, but Geez, what kind of weirdo gets off on a sexy Ewok, right? It's interesting that once upon a time, a show had to be retooled because it was too faithful to the tone and style of the property it was based on. These days, they run such a tight ship that you almost wish we could get a live-action Mario Brothers or an ugly Sonic the Hedgehog now and then.
Normally, I wouldn't even consider admitting someone with your high school records to our university. However, based on your perfect scores on your placement tests, I'm going to give you both academic scholarships.
You know, you're born into this world and there's already lore you need to catch up on, right? You've got a grandma in another state and you've never met her. You've got a sister with a disability, but she wasn't born with it. Maybe you lived in a tent for the first year of your life in a forest in Northern California. The way people talk about the Jungian influence on Star Wars, they seem to think that Joseph Campbell invented the monomyth as a screenwriting guide. What Campbell did was interpret what he perceived to be universal patterns that seemed to echo across storytelling traditions all around the world. He didn't invent it, and he didn't intend to have the final say on the matter. And most importantly, it's not specifically about movies. It's about how we understand the world around us and how we fit into it.
The boy, when he gets to be more than his mother can handle, the men come in with their masks, or whatever their costume is, and they grab the kid, and he thinks he's been taken by the gods. Taken out into the men's ground, and he's beaten up and everything else. But then there, in New Guinea, there's a wonderful, wonderful event where the poor kid has to stand up and fight a man with a mask. I'd say he's fighting the god. The man lets the kid win. Takes the mask off, puts it on the kid. Now, the mask is not there defeated and simply said, oh, this is just myth. It said the mask represents the power that is shaping the society and has shaped you, and now you are a representative of that power. That's a big story.
The experience of living is small and trivial. It takes on mythical dimensions in the retelling. I have a cousin who was playing around in his room after a bath, and he slammed his dick and balls in his dresser drawer. Years later, I had a friend who had a cousin that did the exact same thing. What's the story there?